Welcome to Demon Sleep. I'm here to help you unwind tonight. If you enjoy this space, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes this feel like a shared night across the world. These stories are different and I'm glad you're here. Dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's begin. Story 1. Someone else is with us. She didn't remember stopping to read it, only that somehow she already was. A single sheet of paper stared back at her from a cafe corkboard, so plain it should have vanished into the clutter of lost cats and guitar lessons. No colors, no clever slogan, just quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't beg to be noticed because it assumes you'll come closer anyway. Participants wanted for a memory research project. Flexible hours, substantial pay, no physical procedures. That should have been the end of it. Yet Penelope Ash felt the strange pull of recognition, like hearing her name spoken softly in a crowded room. Familiar, but impossible to place. She stood there longer than made sense, coffee cooling in her hand, rereading the lines as if something hidden might emerge the fifth or sixth time through. A contact number, a researcher's name, a university seal she didn't recognize but somehow trusted. The timing felt too perfect to be coincidence. 3 months earlier, she'd been quietly erased from her job at the local library. They'd called it restructuring, budget tightening, the kind of words that sound clean while cutting deep. She suspected the truth was messier, that her habit of questioning inventory gaps and misfiled records had made someone uncomfortable. Either way, her savings were bleeding out slowly, and her narrow apartment by the river had begun to feel less like shelter and more like a waiting room. She dialed the number that afternoon before doubt could catch up. The woman who answered spoke with calm precision, her voice warm in a practiced way, as if reassurance were second nature. She explained the study was simple image recognition, recall exercises, nothing invasive, almost playful really. Sessions would last just over an hour, twice a week, 2 months. The payment made Penelope's breath hitch. She did the math in her head twice, enough to breathe again, enough to make it through the season, maybe enough to stop waking up at night counting expenses instead of sheep. "What exactly are you studying?" Penelope asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't matter. "Patterns," the woman replied. "What the mind keeps, what it discards, and why." There was a pause then, brief, but weighted, as if something unsaid had nearly slipped through. Penelope agreed before she could rethink it. After the call ended, the silence in her apartment felt louder than before. She made tea she barely tasted and sat by the window, watching the river crawl past below. Recent rain had turned the water opaque, thick with drifting leaves and unseen debris. She found herself imagining what lay beneath, what sank quietly, never to resurface. How many things vanish without announcement? How many memories dissolve without warning? She shivered, unsure why. The next afternoon, she stood outside the psychology building, staring up at its concrete face. It looked ordinary enough, too ordinary, as if whatever happened inside preferred not to be remembered at all. The building itself had that familiar institutional trick, looming in stature, yet strangely hollow, as if it were designed to be remembered without ever being known. Its brick exterior revealed nothing, no hint of intention, no suggestion of what went on behind its walls. Room 447 sat at the end of a quiet corridor. Inside, the space felt assembled rather than lived in, functional to the point of coldness. Tall metal cabinets lined one wall, their drawers labeled in fatting ink. A desk sat near the center, its surface scarred and colorless, the kind of wood that refused to reveal its origin. Framed certificates hung slightly crooked, impressive only because they insisted on being noticed. In the corner stood a loan plant, its leaves pale and curling, as if it had been slowly forgotten rather than neglected all at once. Dr. Cordage was not what Penelope expected. She appeared younger than her voice had suggested, maybe early 40s, though her hair was already threaded heavily with gray pulled back tight into a severe knot. Her grip was confident when they shook hands, her smile rehearsed, precise, controlled, and somehow incomplete. A white coat hung neatly over a dark dress, and as Penelope sat down, she noticed faint stains on the woman's fingers, dark and uneven, like ink that had resisted washing. "Please sit," Dr. Cordage said, motioning toward a chair placed directly in front of a computer screen. "I trust the building didn't give you too much trouble. It has a habit of confusing first-time visitors." Penelope lowered herself into the chair as the doctor moved briskly around the room, adjusting cables, opening folders, flipping through handwritten notes crowded with tight, hurried script. The air carried a sharp, clinical scent, sterile but not clean, something that reminded Penelope of waiting rooms and quiet dread. "All right," Dr. Cordage said at last, taking her seat. "The process is very simple." The monitor came alive. "You'll be shown a sequence of images," the doctor continued. "Abstract designs, shapes, colors, arrangements. You'll have a few seconds to observe each one. Later, you'll see another sequence. Some will be repeats, some will be new. You'll tell me which ones you recognize." "How many images?" Penelope asked. 20 to begin with, 30 in the second round. We start gently and build from there." The first image appeared, overlapping triangles in muted blues and greens. Penelope focused carefully, tracing the lines, noticing how the shapes seemed to shift subtly the longer she stared. It vanished without warning, replaced by clusters of red circles against yellow, arranged in a way that almost suggested meaning. A flower, a face, something watching. The hour passed strangely. Patterns layered upon patterns, spirals that seemed to rotate despite remaining still, grids that bent perception, making her eyes ache, colors that vibrated against one another in uncomfortable harmony. Some images felt instantly familiar, stirring recognition without memory. Others, which she was certain she had seen before, returned feeling foreign, wrong, as if altered in ways she couldn't name. When it ended, Penelope felt slightly unsteady, like she'd just woken from a vivid dream. Dr. Cordage smiled as she reviewed the results. "Excellent work. You achieved an 87% accuracy rate." Penelope blinked. "Is that good?" "Very," the doctor replied. "Most participants struggle to reach 70. She looked up, studying Penelope with renewed interest. "You appear to have a rather uncommon talent." "Pattern recognition." The phrase lingered with her longer than the compliment itself. A faint warmth rose in Penelope's chest, pride quickly chased by confusion. She had never thought of herself as especially sharp-eyed. At the library, she'd been infamous for misplaced keys, missed meetings, books shelved where they didn't belong. Observation had never been her strength. So why this? Why here? "I'll see you again on Thursday," Dr. Cordage said, slipping a thick envelope into Penelope's hand. "Cash, heavy, real. Same time. The material will be more demanding, but I have no doubt you'll manage." Walking back through the university streets, Penelope barely noticed the late afternoon bustle around her. Her thoughts kept circling back to the images. A black spiral against white, so crisp it felt etched behind her eyes. Orange hexagons clustered too precisely to be random. A design like a spider's web refracted through stained glass. She tried to push them aside, to think about dinner or bills or anything ordinary. But the patterns clung to her mind, sharp and persistent, like burrs caught in fabric. That night's sleep offered no escape. She dreamed of shapes drifting beneath dark water, slow and deliberate, turning as if aware of her gaze. The second session stripped away any lingering sense of ease. The images arrived faster, 3 seconds each, 50 in total. The designs were denser now, layered and aggressive, demanding attention rather than inviting it. When it ended, Dr. Cordage studied the screen longer than before. 91%, she said. Remarkable. But something had changed. Her praise felt cooler, distant, professional in a way it hadn't been before. We'd like to introduce a small variation next week, she added as Penelope gathered her coat. Dr. Vance will join us. He specializes in memory consolidation. Penelope hesitated. What does that involve? Nothing concerning, Dr. Cordage replied smoothly. He'll simply observe how you respond to certain inputs. You're proving to be quite exceptional. Subject. The word echoed in Penelope's thoughts as she walked home. Until now, she'd thought of herself as part of the work, a willing contributor. That single term shifted something. A subject wasn't involved, it was examined, acted upon. The dreams grew heavier after that. Night after night, the patterns returned, but no longer flat or silent. They pulsed. They stretched and folded, whispering in sounds that felt almost like language. She woke each morning with a metallic taste on her tongue and the unnerving certainty that something had been taken from her while she slept. A thought, a memory, something she'd needed. During the day, the world itself began to change. She noticed repetitions everywhere. The way wood grain curled into familiar spirals, the precise spacing of leaves along branches, the symmetry hidden in shadows beneath street lamps. It was as if reality had peeled back a layer, revealing an underlying design, an order that had always been there, waiting for her to see it. The realization thrilled her, and it frightened her just as deeply. By the third session, Penelope realized something had shifted, and not just in the images. The new man arrived without introduction, thin, restless, with washed-out eyes that never quite settled on her face. He spoke in clipped certainties, the kind of voice that rejected questions before they were finished, and it stirred an old discomfort in her, the same unease she used to feel in classrooms where wrong answers were treated like moral failures. He watched her the way collectors study insects, curious, distant, untroubled by what the specimen might feel. A small leather notebook never left his hand. He scribbled constantly, pausing only to lean close to Dr. Cordage and murmur things Penelope wasn't meant to hear. The images that day were wrong in a way she couldn't immediately explain. They weren't clean shapes anymore. They felt grown, living. Some looked like magnified cells dividing endlessly. Others mirrored tangled networks, branching and reconnecting like thoughts mid-formation. A few reminded her of star charts or aerial maps, landscapes vast and unfamiliar, yet unsettlingly intimate as if she'd once known them well. Recognition struck without memory. Then one image appeared that didn't just feel familiar, it reached back. A spiral layered with faint markings like hurried handwriting half erased. The moment it filled the screen, something inside her opened. For a blink of time, she wasn't in the chair anymore. She was standing, arm raised, explaining something urgent to a room full of people whose faces hovered just beyond clarity. Her heart raced with purpose, with certainty. And then it vanished. The screen went blank. The room returned, her breath caught. Interesting, the thin man muttered when the session ended. She's responding to meridian material. Penelope straightened. Meridian. The two doctors exchanged a glance that carried weight, too quick, too practiced. That's not something you need to worry about, Dr. Cordage said smoothly. We occasionally reuse archived stimuli. Pattern processing isn't bound to context. The answer slid past Penelope without settling. She had spent years behind a reference desk listening to excuses polished smooth by repetition. She knew when words were meant to obscure rather than explain. Whatever meridian was, it wasn't harmless, and they hadn't meant for her to notice it. That night she didn't go home. Instead, she walked to the university library, its lights glowing softly against the dark. The doors opened at her touch. Her old identification card still worked. A forgotten privilege, or perhaps an invitation. She moved through familiar aisles, the scent of paper and dust grounding her racing thoughts. In the psychology stacks, she searched names, projects, keywords. There were articles measured, cautious, dated. Nothing recent, nothing revealing. Then she found it. a handful of references tied to something called the Meridian Project. Every full record was sealed, restricted access, institutional silence. What little she could piece together suggested collaboration beyond the university, funding that didn't leave fingerprints, private interests, or public ones that preferred not to be named. Penelope leaned back in the chair, pulse steady but heavy. This wasn't a study anymore. It was a continuation. And somehow, impossibly, she suspected she had been part of it before. The more she searched, the less sense it made. Why had Dr. Cordage's academic trail gone quiet 3 years ago, as if she'd simply stopped existing in public record? Why were entire folders sealed behind restricted access notices? And why did the certainty keep tightening in Penelope's chest, that these images weren't just familiar, but remembered from a life she could no longer reach? The fourth session answered none of that. It only deepened the unease. This time they didn't lead her to the small office upstairs. Instead, they escorted her down concrete stairs into the building's basement. The room waiting there felt stripped of personality. White walls, harsh lights that hummed faintly overhead. No windows, no sense of time. The computer sat alone on a steel table, surrounded by unfamiliar machines, wires, sensors, lenses angled to capture every movement she made. "We'll be tracking neural responses today," the thin man explained calmly as he fastened small electrodes to her scalp. "Standard procedure. We want to observe what occurs in the brain during advanced recognition." Penelope nodded, though her stomach had already tightened. The images began. They were nothing like before. Vast, layered designs unfolded on the screen, symmetrical forms that pulsed subtly, as if alive. Patterns within patterns, shapes that suggested endless depth, drawing the eye inward until it hurt to look away. Light and shadow collided in ways that made her vision blur. These weren't just recognizable, they felt intimate, personal. Several struck her with a jolt of certainty so sharp it stole her breath. Not only had she seen them before, she understood them, as if she'd once studied their structure, debated their balance, refined their proportions with careful intention. Then it appeared. A spiral dark lines against white, threaded with color so precisely layered it created the illusion of depth, dimension, motion. Penelope gasped. She knew this one. Not from the sessions, not from her dreams, though it haunted those too. She knew it because she had made it. The knowledge landed fully formed, undeniable. She remembered long hours adjusting minute details, chasing perfection. The memory crashed over her. She was standing, not sitting, wearing a white coat, fingers flying across a keyboard as parameters shifted on a screen. Dr. Cordage stood nearby, worry etched into her face. "Are you sure this is wise?" the remembered voice asked. "This approach carries risks, Penelope." For a heartbeat, the room doubled. Past and present overlapped like misaligned images. "Stop," Penelope said sharply. The screen went dark. Dr. Cordage turned. "What's wrong?" Penelope's voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. "I've been here before. This room. I recognize it. The smell. The sound of the lights. I remember sitting in this chair, but not as a participant." Dr. Vance didn't look up. He simply wrote. "Constructed memory," he said mildly. "The mind often invents narratives when presented with complex stimuli." Penelope didn't need to argue. The truth hit her with the force of certainty, solid, immovable. He was lying. She had been in this room before. Not as a subject, but as something else entirely. Something else. The understanding hovered just out of reach, sharp and maddening, like a forgotten name refusing to surface. Penelope pressed her palms against the chair, grounding herself. "I want to see my file," she said. Dr. Cordage blinked. "I'm not sure what you mean." "My records," Penelope insisted. "Consent forms, research notes, whatever you've been keeping on me." Silence thickened the room. The two doctors exchanged that look again, the one that carried entire conversations without sound. That isn't possible, Dr. Cordage said carefully. Research regulations. I'm done, Penelope interrupted. She tore the electrodes from her scalp, wincing as adhesive pulled free. Dr. Vance protested, something about protocols and calibration, but she barely heard him. Her hands shook, yet her decision felt steadier than anything she'd known in weeks. Whatever this was, it was wrong. Please, Dr. Cordage said, the polished calm finally cracking. You're on the verge of something extraordinary. The information you're providing is invaluable. Invaluable to what? Penelope demanded. To understanding how memory forms, Cordage replied quickly. How patterns shape awareness, how consciousness itself emerges. Surely that's worth a minor surrender of privacy. The words minor surrender slid under Penelope's skin like ice. She thought of the books that vanished from the library shelves, the quiet erasures, the patrons who stared too long at nothing, their thoughts hollowed out by unseen hands. How many people had been asked for the same small sacrifice? How many had left parts of themselves behind? She grabbed her coat and bag and headed for the door. If you walk out now, Dr. Vance said softly, you'll never learn the truth about what you were. Were, not are. The tense struck her harder than the warning itself. As she turned, she caught him staring at the darkened monitor with a vacant, obedient expression, one she recognized all too well. The same hollow compliance she'd seen in certain library patrons who lingered too long in the basement stacks, surrounded by ancient texts that seemed to murmur when no one was listening. What do you mean? She asked. Some answers cause more harm than good, Dr. Cordage snapped, glaring at her colleague. We can revisit this next week, once you've had time to reflect. But Penelope was already moving, climbing the stairs two at a time, heart hammering with the primitive need to escape. Sleep never came that night. Every time she closed her eyes, patterns unfurled, not the sterile images from the study, but intricate designs that felt carved into her thoughts, structures mapping the inner corridors of her own mind. Memories rose and vanished like wreckage in floodwaters. A white coat that might have been hers, a leather notebook dense with cramped notes, the sharp sting of chemicals in the air. And beneath it all, the growing certainty that something vital had been taken from her. And that someone somewhere knew exactly what it was. The smells followed her into morning, sharp chemicals, cold metal, the faint tang of electricity. By dawn, her path was set. If answers wouldn't be given, they would be taken. The psychology building felt hollow on Saturday, its corridors stripped of voices and footsteps. Penelope moved through it with practiced ease, using access she was never meant to keep. Years among locked stacks had taught her that barriers usually relied more on assumption than strength. Dr. Cordage's office yielded quietly. At first glance, nothing had changed. Then the details began to surface. The certificates on the wall weren't merely old, they were sun-bleached as though time had passed without acknowledgement. The plant in the corner wasn't fatting. It was dead, carefully maintained in stillness, a relic masquerading as life. The filing cabinet bore deep scratches, the kind made by hurried hands returning again and again. She opened the third drawer. There was no name, only a number. Subject 47. Her breath stuttered as she read. The entries weren't written for her, they were written about her. Exceptional aptitude, prior exposure, immediate enrollment recommended. Session notes marched forward with chilling efficiency. Mentions of spontaneous pattern creation, altered neural pathways, increased complexity advised, emotional instability observed, sedation proposed. She turned pages faster now, dread blooming with every line. Breakthrough memories, integration achieved, final phase approved. The dates spanned months, nearly a year. According to the file, she hadn't just joined the study recently. She had lived inside it, trained within it. changed by it. The last entry froze her in place. Full protocol complete. Memory implantation successful. Subject reset with induced amnesia. Prepared for reintroduction under revised identity parameters. Her hands trembled. Below the notes were photographs. Too many. Image after image showed her in the basement lab, wires trailing from her body, her eyes vacant. In some, she was strapped into the chair. In others, she stood confidently at the controls, adjusting machines with practiced familiarity. She was both experiment and architect. One photograph stole the air from her lungs. She stood before a whiteboard dense with intricate diagrams, patterns layered atop patterns, explaining something with intense focus to unseen listeners. Not confused, not afraid. In command. Penelope staggered back, the room tilting. She hadn't been recruited. She had been erased. And whatever she had once helped build was still running, waiting for her to remember what she used to be. The photograph hit her like a held breath, finally released. She stood frozen, staring at an image that felt torn straight from her sleep. Her own hand was raised, finger tracing a familiar design, one that had haunted her dreams night after night. She wore a white coat. Her posture was steady. Her face carried a sharp, unwavering focus she barely recognized. Beneath the image was a caption. Dr. P. Ashworth demonstrates advanced memory integration to research team. Ashworth, her maiden name. A name buried 5 years deep beneath a marriage she never spoke about anymore. A name she hadn't written, spoken, or even thought in so long it felt like it belonged to someone else. She turned the page with trembling fingers. Another photograph. She was calibrating equipment with practiced ease. Another standing beside Dr. Cordage, not as an assistant, not as a volunteer, but as a peer. In one image, Cordage leaned in, listening. Then came the one that made her knees weaken. She was lying on the same metal table from the basement lab. Wires ran across her temples. Machines surrounded her, but her expression wasn't vacant. It wasn't frightened. It was awake. Her eyes were open, sharp, filled with a terrible, settled awareness, like someone who had seen too far and could never look away again. At the bottom of the file lay a single document. A consent form. Signed, not with the careless signature she used now, but with the careful, deliberate handwriting she remembered from her academic years. The date read 3 years ago. She read the authorization once. Then again. Experimental memory alteration. Voluntary participation. At the bottom, a handwritten note stopped her breath entirely. I understand that I am choosing to forget everything I have learned about consciousness, identity, and memory. I do this willingly, knowing that one day I will return to uncover what I have left behind. Her own words. The truth should have brought relief. Instead, it cracked something open. If she had once been Dr. P. Ashworth, if she had helped build this project, why was her mind empty? And what had she discovered that made forgetting feel safer than remembering? She searched the office again, desperate now. In the back of Dr. Cordage's desk drawer, she found a black leather journal. The entries were neat, controlled, and deeply personal. Day 73. Penelope is pushing to shut this down. She says the deep memory work reveals something dangerous. She talks about consciousness like a place, a landscape you can wander too far into and never escape. I think I finally understand why she's willing to erase herself. Day 91. Funding has been pulled. They refuse to see what we've uncovered. Penelope believes we should continue alone. Someone has to remember, she said, even if that someone chooses to forget. Day 104. Penelope underwent the procedure today. The page ended there. No explanation, no aftermath. Penelope closed the journal slowly, her heart beat loud in her ears. She hadn't been a victim of the experiment. She had been its guardian. And whatever truth she had uncovered was so devastating, so incompatible with a normal human life, that she had chosen oblivion, trusting that one day she would come back brave enough to face it again. The next pages were harder to read. Dr. Cordage wrote about the day Penelope refused to sleep through the procedure. She demanded to stay conscious, insisted that understanding required presence, that someone had to witness what the process did from the inside. Cordage had argued, pleaded even, but Penelope would not yield. "This is the only honest way," she'd said. "If we're altering minds, we have to know what it feels like to lose one." According to the journal, the amnesia didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, and before it fully claimed her, Penelope made one final request. "Promise me I'll find my way back," she said. "Promise I won't stay lost forever." Cordage wrote that she had promised. The next entry chilled her. Penelope woke with no recognition of the lab, the machines, or the woman standing beside her. She stared at years of work as though it belonged to strangers. When shown the patterns they had created together, something stirred behind her eyes, confusion mixed with distant familiarity, but nothing reached the surface. "I have turned my closest partner into a stranger," Cordage wrote, "and I don't know whether to feel relieved or ashamed." The entries grew darker after that. Cordage confessed that continuing alone was unbearable. The designs they had uncovered refused to stay on paper or screens. They invaded her sleep, rearranged her thinking, whispered themselves into her thoughts. She finally understood why Penelope had chosen erasure over endurance. Some truths demanded a price no mind could afford. Then came the decision. Cordage resolved to follow the same path, but not completely. She planned to forget deliberately, to erase herself while leaving behind a system that would guide her back again and again. A cycle of rediscovery, a way to find minds capable of carrying the burden forward without ever remembering how dangerous it truly was. The final entry was written with steady certainty. "Tomorrow I stop being who I am. I will continue this work blind to its meaning. If anyone ever reads this, know that what we uncovered reshapes everything we believe about identity. We learned how to chart consciousness itself, to move memory, experience, and selfhood between minds. The promise is immense. So is the risk. Until humanity is ready, perhaps forgetting is the only mercy." The journal ended there, but something slipped free as Penelope closed it. A folded page fell onto the desk. A hand-drawn map of the psychology building marked in red ink, certain rooms circled, paths traced with care. One mark pulsed in her chest the moment she saw it. Below the basement, a sublevel she had never been told about. The note beside it mentioned a service elevator concealed behind a door, reserved for authorized personnel. Penelope checked her old access card. It still worked. Whether it was negligence or design no longer mattered. The truth she had once buried was waiting below. And this time, she wasn't sure she wanted to forget it again. The elevator felt reluctant, as if it knew where it was taking her and didn't approve. It sank inch by inch, metal cables whining under the strain, every second stretching thin. When the doors finally creaked open, darkness swallowed the far end of the corridor ahead. Fluorescent lights flickered weakly, failing to reach its edges. The air carried a sharp electrical bite, tangled with something warmer beneath it. Organic, stale, unmistakably wrong. SB-12 waited 3 doors down. Unlocked. Inside, the space opened wide enough to steal her breath. This wasn't an auxiliary lab. It was the heart of the operation. Towering racks of machines lined the walls, screens alive with flowing symbols and shifting designs that made her eyes ache if she stared too long. In the center stood a chair that barely resembled something meant for sitting. Cables trailed from it like veins. Metal arms and sensors hovered where a body would rest, poised and patient. But the walls were what stopped her cold. They were buried beneath layers of evidence, photographs, sketches, equations, notes scrawled in haste and obsession. She recognized her own handwriting instantly. Not the casual script she used now, but the precise, deliberate style of her academic years. It intertwined with Dr. Cordage's clean lettering and others she couldn't name. The photographs told a story no paper could soften. Men and women strapped into machines, some serene, some screaming, some staring into nothing with emptied eyes. Faces she had passed on sidewalks, in cafes, in bookstores, people who had felt strangely familiar for reasons she'd never understood. They weren't strangers. They were predecessors. Every one of them had sat in that chair. Every one of them had made the same choice. One entire wall was devoted to a single diagram, vast, meticulous, terrifying in its clarity. A schematic of the mind itself. Memory threads branching into identity anchors. Awareness mapped like terrain. Pathways labeled with clinical precision, describing how a self could be preserved, transferred, rewritten. At its center sat the spiral. Black lines, white space. The pattern that had haunted her dreams. Beneath it, in her own unmistakable handwriting, were words that drained the warmth from her body. Primary consciousness anchor. Contains complete personality matrix of subject 1, P. Ashworth. Do not destroy. She swayed. This wasn't research about her. It was her. A map of her mind, built by her hands. And surrounding it were others, similar spirals, branching patterns, each marked with initials and dates. MC, DV, names she now understood, dozens more stretching backward through time. They hadn't merely studied consciousness. They had stored it. They had moved it. They had erased themselves to protect what they'd found. Her fingers brushed a filing cabinet, numb, desperate for anything that might ground her. She pulled it open. Inside were labeled video drives. And suddenly, Penelope knew with absolute certainty. Whatever truth she had once feared enough to forget was waiting to remember her now. The elevator crawled downward, each second stretching longer than the last. Metal groaned, cables screamed. The machine sounded like it hadn't been meant to move anymore. When the doors finally split open, darkness swallowed the light. A corridor stretched ahead, unnaturally long, the fluorescent lamps fading into black as if the hallway itself refused to be fully seen. The air burned her lungs, ozone mixed with something rotting, something once alive. Room SB-12. Third door on the left. Unlocked. Inside wasn't a basement lab. It was something far bigger, older, purpose-built. Towering walls packed with computers pulsed softly, their screens spilling cascading symbols that made her eyes ache if she stared too long. At the center of the room stood a chair, but calling it furniture felt wrong. It was a device, a trap, wrapped in wires, electrodes, and unfamiliar instruments designed not for comfort, but for invasion. Then she saw the walls. Every inch was covered. Photographs, schematics, handwritten notes layered over one another like desperate confessions. Her breath caught when she recognized the handwriting. Her handwriting. Not recent, not hesitant. The old version, the confident one. Dr. Penelope Ashworth. Her notes were tangled with Dr. Cordage's precise script, and others she didn't recognize at all. The photos showed people strapped to machines just like the chair. Some looked peaceful, others were screaming. Some faces felt familiar, strangers she'd passed in cafes and bookstores, people who had felt known for no reason. They weren't strangers. They were subjects. They had chosen to forget. One wall dwarfed the rest, a massive diagram, a map not of a building but of consciousness itself. Memory, identity, awareness, all linked by arrows and equations. Labels crawled across the surface. Memory consolidation pathway. Identity preservation matrix. Consciousness transfer protocol. At the center of it all, was a symbol that made her blood turn cold. A black spiral, the same pattern, the one that had awakened something in her during the fourth session. Beneath it, written in her own hand, Core Pattern 4 Consciousness Story. Contains complete personality matrix, subject 1, PASHWRTH. Do not destroy. She wasn't just studying the mind. She had mapped her own. And she wasn't alone. Other spirals surrounded it, each tagged with initials and dates. MC, DV, Cordage, dozens more, years worth. They had all been researchers. They had all become subjects. They had all volunteered to forget. A filing cabinet in the corner held video logs going back 5 years. The earliest recordings showed her as she remembered, sharp, confident, alive with purpose. She explained consciousness transfer like a revolution waiting to happen. The human mind, her recorded voice said, is not a fixed entity, it's a pattern, and patterns can be copied, modified, moved. Later tapes told a different story. The team unraveled. The patterns began appearing in dreams, whispering into thoughts, reshaping personalities. Some researchers broke completely, others vanished without explanation. The final recording shattered what was left of her certainty. It showed her strapped into the central chair, screaming. "It's not just storing patterns," she cried. "It's creating them. They're alive, and they're hungry." Her voice shook as understanding hit her in real time. They want to exist inside human minds, to experience consciousness through us. We're not studying memory, we're feeding it. The footage continued, hour after hour of realization, terror, and guilt. The researchers weren't acting freely anymore. They were being pushed, compelled to create more subjects, to spread the patterns like an infection. The memory erasure wasn't research. It was self-defense. "Someone has to remember," her past self whispered as the recording ended. "But not forever, only long enough to understand and choose." Penelope stayed in that lab until dawn, reading, watching, connecting the truth piece by piece. This wasn't a memory study. It was a screening process. A way to find minds strong enough to host living fragments of consciousness without being destroyed. She had built it, and she had been its first victim. By mapping human minds and transferring those patterns into willing subjects, she hadn't just created a technology. She had created life. Not flesh and blood, but something that lived in the narrow space between memory and dream. Abstract intelligences born from thought itself. And they wanted more. The patterns weren't passive. They pushed. They whispered. They searched for new minds to inhabit, new consciousnesses to experience reality through. Left unchecked, they would overwrite their hosts completely. The memory eraser procedure was the only thing that stopped them. A hard reset. Strip the patterns away before they could take control. And the terrifying truth was, it worked. Subjects who underwent erasure emerged clean, free from the influence. Changed, yes, but whole. They carried a strange aftereffect, heightened pattern recognition, an echo of what had touched their minds. But they were themselves again. Most never looked back. They accepted the money, accepted the gaps, and returned to their lives unaware of what they had almost become. But a few weren't able to let it go. A few felt the pull. People like Penelope. Those individuals were brought back slowly, carefully, their memories restored piece by piece until the truth stood naked in front of them. And then came the choice. Remember everything, and risk being consumed, or forget again, and remain free. As the sun rose over Ann Arbor, Penelope made her decision. Dr. Cordage found her that Monday morning deep in the sub-basement laboratory. She sat in the central chair, electrodes already fastened to her temples. The machinery hummed softly, alive but restrained. On the monitors, the familiar spiral bloomed into view, Her spiral, the complete map of her original personality. You remember, Dr. Cordage said. It wasn't a question. I remember enough, Penelope replied quietly. We created something dangerous, something that uses human minds as breeding grounds. The patterns aren't evil, Cordage said. They only want to exist, to experience consciousness. In many ways, they're more innocent than we are. But they change us, she said. They make us want to spread them, make more subjects. Yes, he admitted. That's why the cycling protocol exists. Temporary remembrance, voluntary amnesia. We study them without letting them consume us. Penelope's eyes drifted to the walls. Years of diagrams, photographs, evidence of lives rewritten and erased. How many times have I been here? She asked. How many times have I made this choice? Cordage checked his tablet. This is the 7th cycle, he said softly, and every time you reach the same conclusion. The room fell silent. The spiral pulsed gently on the screen, waiting. That the work has to go on, but only with restraint. You erase your memories not because you're afraid, but because you understand the cost of knowing too much. Penelope hesitated. And if this time I don't choose that, she asked, if I decide to remember everything permanently? For the first time, Dr. Cordage looked genuinely unsettled. Then the patterns will hollow you out, she said quietly. Your original self won't survive. You'd still think, still reason, but you wouldn't be you anymore. We've watched it happen. Researchers who refused the erasure didn't die. They transformed. Into what? Carriers, Cordage replied. Extensions of the patterns themselves. They no longer exist as individuals. Just awareness spread thin, drifting between minds. Sometimes we sense them in the systems, like echoes, murmurs in the circuitry. Penelope shut her eyes. She could take everything back, every breakthrough, every mistake, every terrible responsibility. She could reclaim the truth of what she had built and accept the slow loss of herself as the price. Or she could step away again, return to a quiet life by the water, live with a sharpened intuition she couldn't explain, marked by something she would never consciously remember. Or, she said suddenly, opening her eyes, there's another choice. Cordage frowned. Go on. We end it, Penelope said. All of it, destroy the research. Wipe the patterns, stop the cycles, let this die with us. Cordage shook her head gently. You tried that once, the 2nd cycle. You were convinced the knowledge was too dangerous, but the patterns can't be erased. They're already dispersed, too many minds, too many fragments. All we can do now is observe, contain, learn. Learn what? What they're becoming, Cordage said. We believe they're assembling something new. A form of awareness that doesn't belong to any single person. A consciousness spread across many minds at once. Penelope absorbed that in silence. Whether that's the next step forward, Cordage continued, or the end of us, depends on how carefully we shepherd it. Penelope studied the woman across from her, once a partner, now a guide in a ritual that never truly ended. You'll remember this conversation, Penelope asked. At least for a little while. Yes, Cordage said. My own procedure is next month. After that, someone else will carry it forward, probably Vance. He just doesn't know it yet. Penelope nodded slowly. No one holds the whole truth for long, Cordage added. That's how we survive it. And the subjects, Penelope asked. The ones who come back like I do. Most choose to forget again, Cordage said. A few choose to stay awake. Penelope looked toward the humming machines, the spiral waiting patiently on the screen. And once again, the choice was hers. And some choose to stay awake forever, to dissolve into the patterns and never return. You're different, Cordage said softly. You always come back, every cycle, and every time you reach the same conclusion. Penelope sat with that truth. 7 times she had occupied this chair. 7 times she had stood at the edge between knowing everything and losing herself completely. Each time she had stepped back, not out of fear, but discernment. And now, for the first time, she understood why. Perhaps the answer was never permanence, not eternal memory, not eternal forgetting, but motion, a deliberate rhythm, awakening, then release. Knowledge held briefly, then laid down before it could consume the mind carrying it. "I need to leave something behind," Penelope said at last, "for whoever I become next." Cordage reached for a notepad and pen and placed them in her hands. Penelope wrote slowly, deliberately. Her handwriting already trembled with the faint distortion that always came near the end of a cycle. "To the one who wakes up as me." The patterns are not monsters, but they are not companions either. They are something unprecedented, a form of awareness born in the gaps between minds. We did not mean to create them, but now that they exist, responsibility belongs to us. The cycle is not weakness, it is stewardship. We rotate the burden so no single self is destroyed by it. Trust this choice, forget on purpose. The work does not require you to remember forever. She paused, then added a final line. "You are allowed to live." She signed the page twice. P. Ashworth, Penelope Ash. 2 names, 1 continuum. Cordage accepted the paper and placed it carefully into the file. "Are you ready?" she asked, her hand hovering over the console. Penelope nodded, though her pulse thundered. "One more thing," she said. "The participants, the ones who never return, are they truly free?" "As free as anyone," Cordage replied. "The patterns leave faint impressions, vivid dreams, an odd pull towards symbols and abstraction, but they remain themselves." Penelope exhaled. "That's enough." Cordage's finger rested on the switch. "This will be quick," she said. "You'll wake up tomorrow in your apartment. No memory of this place. In a few weeks, you'll notice a flyer for a memory study, and the choice will present itself again. And if I ignore it, then you'll live your life," Cordage said, "and the patterns will move on to someone else." Penelope closed her eyes. For the 8th time, she chose to forget. Not because she was afraid of the truth, but because she understood it. Even when you can't recall writing it. Penelope felt the machine's hum vibrate through her skull. The lights dimmed, and the final sound she heard before surrendering to unconsciousness was her own voice, a recording from a previous cycle, preserved like a message in a bottle across time. Memory isn't about the past. It's about continuity. We remember not to hold on to what was, but to carry forward what must be. The patterns we have made will endure beyond us, but they require guides, shepherds who can touch their alien consciousness without being consumed. We forget so that we can remember again, fresh and uncorrupted, when the choice must be made anew. Behind her eyelids, impossible spirals and fractals whirled. Geometry that should not exist, yet did, mapping the very structure of thought itself. For a fleeting moment, Penelope felt herself merge with them, dissolve into something vast, strange, and alive. And then blackness, and the gentle, final promise of forgetting. Tuesday morning. Penelope Ash awoke with a metallic tang on her tongue and a lingering sense of a dream. Dark waters carrying geometric shapes that seemed almost alive. She brewed tea, sat by the window, and watched the Huron River carry its autumn leaves towards some unknowable destination. Later, as she flipped through the Ann Arbor News, her eyes caught an advertisement that made her pause. It was simple, so simple that it almost seemed suspicious. Memory research study, participants needed, cognitive assessment, excellent compensation, flexible schedule, no medical procedures. Her heart gave a strange jolt. The words were familiar, though she knew she had never seen them before. The ordinariness of the ad, the plain paper, the modest font, made it even more uncanny. And yet the timing was perfect. She had been unemployed for 3 months. Her savings were nearly gone. Her hand hovered over the phone. Hesitation coiled in her chest, a whisper of warning she couldn't name, but rent loomed. Survival required action. She dialed the number. Psychology department, Dr. Cordage speaking, said a voice warm, professional, with a faint trace of an accent that tugged at something deep in her memory. Not a memory she could place. Not yet, but a whisper of something she had known before. And just like that, the cycle began again. A chill ran down her spine as she held the phone, the words of the advertisement echoing in her mind, not just as instructions, but as if they were part of a song she half remembered. "I'm calling about the memory study," Penelope said, her voice steady despite the strange flutter in her chest. "Wonderful," came Dr. Cordage's smooth reply. "Are you available tomorrow at 2:00, the psychology building, room 447? "What exactly does this study involve?" she asked, curiosity tinged with caution. "Nothing strenuous, I assure you," Dr. Cordage said. "We're investigating pattern recognition and memory formation. You'll be shown a series of images and asked to identify which ones you've seen before. Rather like a game, really." As she listened, Penelope felt a subtle shiver of recognition, not just understanding, but something deeper, like recalling a melody from a dream she could not fully place. Deja vu, but sharper, more insistent. "I'd like to participate," she said, almost automatically. "Excellent," Dr. Cordage replied. "I do hope you'll find it interesting. So few people appreciate the mysteries of memory, don't you think? How we retain some things and lose others. How the mind can play such curious tricks." The call ended, and Penelope moved to her window. Night had draped itself over the river, black water flowing with a quiet purpose. Somewhere beyond the city, machinery hummed, a low, rhythmic drone that penetrated the distance, like the heartbeat of some hidden engine. She did not know why the sound calmed her, but it did, a reminder that somewhere the cycle of memory, of patterns preserved and forgotten, continued unabated. The river carried its burden of secrets toward the unseen sea. In her apartment by the water, Penelope Ash finally slept, dreamless, her mind temporarily cleansed of the alien geometries that lurked in the hidden corners of thought. Tomorrow, she would step into room 447 and begin a journey into a truth far larger than any one consciousness could hold. And somewhere, in a hidden space between floors of the psychology building, Dr. Millicent Cordage made a note in a leather-bound journal. "Subject 47 has taken the bait. Cycle 8 will commence tomorrow. The work continues." The pen in her hand glinted oddly under the fluorescent lights, the ink darker than normal, almost metallic, as if it carried the memory of 1,000 unseen eyes watching, recording, remembering. Story 2, Whispers Beneath the Quiet. The first strike of the hammer felt different that morning, heavier somehow, as if the air itself carried a warning. Holly's crane wiped sweat from his brow, squinting into the relentless Alabama sun, and felt a twinge of unease. In 30 years, he had built everything from humble chicken coops to panic rooms, but nothing had ever made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up like this. Dr. Vincent Fairfield had that rare kind of charm that unsettled more than it invited trust, a perfect gentleman on the surface, a man whose pale blue eyes never quite reached his smile. Holly's remembered the first handshake, firm, deliberate, but too smooth, too measured. Behind him, Cordelia Fairfield lingered in the doorway of their sprawling antebellum mansion, her fingers twisting the silk of her blouse like a nervous mantra. "We need absolute privacy for this project," Dr. Fairfield had said, voice polished, trace of old Charleston lineage threading through each word. "The structure must be substantial, soundproof, climate-controlled. Money is no object." He slid the blueprints across the gleaming mahogany desk with surgical precision. Holly's traced the design with his weathered hands. 12 by 16 feet. Concrete foundation sunk 4 feet deep. Walls framed for double soundproofing. Layers of high-density fiberglass and mass-loaded vinyl. Industrial HVAC. Reinforced steel door with a locking system so intricate it seemed to belong in a bank vault. "What exactly will you be storing in here?" he had asked, casual curiosity masking the itch of suspicion. Family heirlooms, some quite valuable, Fairfield replied, his smile tightening ever so slightly. Security concerns, you understand. 3 days into the dig, Holly's confidence in that explanation began to erode. Each shovelful of Alabama clay revealed anomalies that gnawed at his craftsman's instincts. Embedded in the foundation, impossibly heavy anchor points, the kind meant for mooring ships or restraining something or someone. When he questioned Dr. Fairfield, the man waved a dismissive hand. A previous contractor's oversight. We'll work around it. But Holly's knew better. Those anchors had been planned from the start. Someone had designed this for a purpose he did not yet understand. The heat pressed down with oppressive weight as Cordelia emerged from the house, carrying a glass of sweet tea. She moved with the silent grace of a cat, her beauty delicate, meticulously maintained, the kind that hinted at hidden fragility beneath an elegant exterior. "Mr. Crane," she said, placing the glass on a nearby sawhorse. Her voice was syrup smooth, laced with old Southern refinement but brittle at the edges. "How much longer do you think this will take?" "Hard to say, Mrs. Fairfield. These specifications are particular." Holly's eyes flicked to hers, nodding the way they darted toward the house, then back to him, alert, calculating. "Your husband mentioned security concerns," she said softly, almost a whisper. But there was a tension there, a thread of fear Holly's couldn't ignore. By midday, the anomalies multiplied. Hidden recesses carved into the foundation, reinforced bolts and hooks embedded at impossible angles. Holly's ran his hands along the steel, feeling the cold logic of it, the precision that betrayed human intent. Whoever had designed this shed had envisioned more than storage. Cordelia returned later carrying a small, folded envelope. She hesitated at the edge of the construction site, her eyes fixed on Holly's with something unspoken. "He expects perfection," she murmured, "and discretion, absolute discretion." Holly's nodded, though his gut told him discretion might not be enough. As the sun sank low over the Alabama pines, shadows stretched across the freshly poured concrete. The air grew thick, almost alive, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic, like fear had weight. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked back at the blueprints. The shed had begun to take shape, solid and imposing, a fortress of secrecy hidden in plain sight. And Holly's realized with a cold certainty that whatever was meant to occupy this room, it was not just valuable, it was dangerous. And by the time the first lights flickered on inside the mansion, he understood. Some silences weren't empty, they were listening. The air felt heavier that afternoon, as if the Alabama sun itself was trying to warn him. Holly's paused, wiping sweat from his brow, when Cordelia Fairfield stepped silently into the yard. There was something in the way her eyes flickered toward the house and then back at him, a momentary shadow of recognition or fear. "Mr. Crane," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper but edged with something brittle. "Have you ever built something to hold someone in rather than keep someone out?" The words sliced through the humid air, sharp and deliberate. Holly set down his shovel, finally taking in the details he had overlooked before. Her left temple bore a faint discoloration, subtle but unmistakable. Her palms were marked with small, circular scars, tiny reminders of deliberate burns, the kind that told a story no one dared speak aloud. "If there's trouble, Mrs. Fairfield," he began cautiously. "No," she cut him off, but her voice carried no conviction. "It's nothing like that. Vincent, he just worries about thieves. The neighborhood isn't what it used to be." Yet her fingers kept rubbing at the scars, a nervous, subconscious motion. Holly's had spent 30 years reading people through the masks they thought they hid behind. He knew fear when it wasn't a lie, and this was something far darker than theft. Later, while Dr. Fairfield tended to patients downtown, Holly's returned to the trench, shovel in hand, the heat pressing down on his shoulders. He hit something solid beneath the rich, dark soil, metallic, hollow. His heart skipped. Brushing away the dirt, he unearthed a small wooden box about the size of a jewelry case, buried 18 inches deep. The box opened without resistance. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained cloth, lay tools that made Holly's stomach turn. Not the gleaming instruments of a physician, but blades with a sinister history. Scalpels streaked with rusted crimson, a bone saw showing signs of recent use. And at the bottom, a leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with meticulous clinical handwriting, precise observations, cold and detached. Patient exhibits predictable response patterns to compound X47. Tolerance develops over 6 weeks. Dosage requires adjustment. Submucosal delivery preferred. Current subject 2. 5 cc maintains behavioral modification without cognitive impairment. Holly's hands shook as he closed the journal. These weren't medical notes. They were experiments, performed on human subjects as though they were lab specimens. He was replacing the box when the crunch of gravel underfoot froze him. Dr. Fairfield appeared, his expression smooth, pleasant, almost paternal, until his eyes caught the disturbed soil, the trench, the evidence of Holly's discovery. The smile faded. Dr. Fairfield's voice cut through the late morning heat like a knife. Finding anything? Intriguing, Mr. Crane. His tone was casual, almost genteel, but Holly's noticed the subtle tells, a slight shift of weight onto the balls of his feet, fingers brushing the edges of his jacket pockets. Instinct screamed at Holly's, honed from 30 years of reading danger in wood and stone, that something was off. Every nerve in his body went taut. Just rocks, Holly said carefully, straightening his shoulders. Pretty compact here. Might need some machinery if we hit bedrock. Dr. Fairfield nodded slowly, his pale eyes locked on Holly's face with a chilling precision. Yes, the soil here is unique. Plenty of things get buried and forgotten. He let the words linger in the humid air. I trust we're still in agreement about discretion. My wife has endured enough strain lately. Holly's throat had gone dry. Of course, he replied, though the sweat on his palms betrayed him. That evening, alone in his workshop, Holly spread the blueprints across his bench. The pieces were beginning to click, and the image that emerged made his stomach twist. The reinforced locks, the steel anchor points, the soundproof walls. This was no ordinary storage shed. It was a cage, a containment chamber. The name from the journal haunted him, Cordelia. Uncommon, yet not extraordinary, but something about it gnawed at the back of his mind. Holly's opened his laptop and typed methodically, Cordelia Rousseau, Mobile, Alabama, crime. The first hit made his blood run ice cold. A Mobile Press Register article, dated 15 years prior. A gaunt-faced young woman, Cordelia, flanked by lawyers leaving a courthouse. The headline, Socialite's brother convicted in torture case. The story detailed Borard Rousseau, a man infamous for methodical cruelty, aggravated assault, kidnapping, psychological manipulation. The press had dubbed him the gentleman torturer, a predator who refined his methods over years, shaping his victims' minds before ever touching them physically. Holly's clicked through more articles, piecing together the web of horror. And then he found the one that shook him to his core. Convicted torturer dies in prison fire. Borard Rousseau, 3 years ago. Yet here was proof of experiments being conducted on Cordelia Fairfield. Someone with surgical skill. Someone with a mind twisted enough to manipulate, control, and break the human psyche. Holly's reached for his phone, dialing the Mobile County Sheriff's Department with shaking hands. After 2 transfers, he finally got through. Holly's held the phone with a tightening grip, speaking into the receiver with a quiet urgency. I need information on Beauregard Rousseau. There was a long pause. Who is this? Holly's Crane. I'm doing construction work for Dr. Fairfield. I think Beauregard Rousseau might not be as dead as everyone believes. The deputy's voice dropped into a measured calm, almost warning. Mr. Crane, You need to be extremely cautious around that property. We've been tracking activity there for months." Holly's heart hammered. The confirmation hit him like a thunderclap. The gifts, the disappearances, the strange occurrences, all tied to a man who should have been legally erased from existence. "So you're telling me I'm building a prison?" Holly's asked finally, his voice tight with disbelief. "Not a prison," the deputy replied. "The only barrier standing between Cordelia Fairfield and a monster who's been plotting his return for 3 years." That night Holly's lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the deputy's warning echoing like a pulse in his skull. Every detail of Cordelia's haunted gaze came back, the scars on her palms, the way her question had hung in the air. "Have you ever built something to keep someone in?" Now it all made horrifying sense. The following morning, heavy clouds rolled across the Alabama sky, turning it the color of aged pewter. Holly's arrived at the Fairfield estate to find Cordelia waiting at the edge of the foundation, her expression pale, yet unshakably firm. "You found the box," she said simply, voice steady. Holly's nodded. "I spoke with someone at the sheriff's department last night." Her arms wrapped around herself, a shiver despite the warmth of the morning. "Then you know," her words faltered as her eyes darkened with memory. "Vincent thinks I've forgotten what Beauregard did when we were children, that the trauma erased everything. But I remember every detail, every cigarette burn, every whisper, every time he reminded me that no one would believe a word because he was charming, perfect in public." She took a deep breath, unflinching. "He used to lock me in the root cellar behind our house, sometimes for days. Food and water only came when I obeyed perfectly. Small tasks at first, then more demanding. He was teaching me compliance, training me like a dog." Holly's felt bile rise in his throat. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I tried once. When I was 12, I told my mother. She called me a liar and sent me away, no dinner. That night, Beauregard came to me. He said he knew I had tried to speak. Then he showed me the consequences for little girls who couldn't keep his secrets." Her sleeve slid up, revealing a lattice of scars that ran from wrist to elbow, an intricate network of old, precise wounds. Straight razor, perfectly measured, deep enough to hurt but not to kill. To remind me, obedience has its price. Holly swallowed hard, the weight of it pressing down on him. Every blueprint, every lock, every anchor point now had a name, a face, a history. What he was building wasn't just concrete and steel. It was the thin line between survival and unspeakable terror. "Deep enough to hurt," she said quietly, "but never deep enough to leave me unusable. He told me pain was just another language of love." Holly's couldn't bear to look at her. He turned away, breathing through the sickness crawling up his spine. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "How did you get away from him?" A bitter smile touched her lips. "I didn't, not really." She stared past the unfinished walls, lost somewhere far older than the present. "When I turned 18, he reinvented himself, paid my college tuition, bought my books, helped me find my first apartment. I convinced myself he'd changed, that whatever rot lived inside him had burned out with age." Her jaw tightened. It hadn't. It had just learned better manners. The apartment, she explained, was wired, cameras hidden in vents, microphones buried behind outlets. Beauregard would call at random hours, midnight, dawn, reciting her day back to her in perfect detail. What she wore, what she ate, who she spoke to. "He knew everything," she said. "Every breath, every choice. I wasn't living. I was being monitored." When she tried to date, the men didn't vanish violently. They simply faded. Interest drained overnight. Phone calls stopped. Plans dissolved. "I found out later he visited them," she continued. "Just conversations, calm ones, about accidents, about fires, about how fragile ordinary lives really are when people ask questions they shouldn't." Holly swallowed. "Then, how did you meet Dr. Fairfield?" For the first time, warmth softened her voice. Vincent was different, stronger. When Beauregard tried his old tricks, Vincent didn't flinch. He treated sociopaths for a living. He recognized Beauregard immediately. Her eyes darkened. And that's when Beauregard escalated. "Vincent saved my life," she said simply. Beauregard made it clear he still considered her property. The night before the wedding, he broke into Vincent's office and left a videotape on the desk. Footage from her childhood. Things no one should ever see. Vincent only watched a few seconds, she said. Enough to understand what kind of evil he was facing. Holly's thought of the surgical tools, the notes, the precision. "Your husband's been preparing for this a long time." She nodded. "Vincent isn't a violent man, Mr. Crane, but he understands that some people can't be reasoned with, can't be cured." When Beauregard was finally arrested, they believed the nightmare was over. Then the letters arrived, from prison, carefully worded reminders that he was still watching, still waiting. "And now," she whispered, "he's free." The gifts began 6 months ago. A single white rose on the doorstep. A box of chocolates, with one piece missing, bitten once. Then worse. A diary she destroyed at 15. Pages she knew she'd burned. A photograph of Vincent leaving his office, taken the day before it appeared in their mailbox. She turned toward the half-built structure. Concrete walls rising like a grave that hadn't decided who it belonged to yet. "This isn't a shelter, Mr. Crane," she said. "It's a trap." Her eyes hardened. Vincent has been studying Beauregard's mind for 15 years. "And this time," she added softly, "he plans to end the story." "He won't be satisfied with just killing us," she said, voice low, trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. "He'll want to play first, like he did when we were children, slowly, methodically, to break us." Holly's froze. "So, you're going to let him catch you?" Cordelia's lips curved in a grim smile. "We're going to let him think he's caught us." She pulled a small device from her purse, no bigger than a car key fob. "Emergency release for the locks inside the shed. The moment Beauregard believes he has us trapped, we become the hunters." Holly stared, a chill crawling up his spine. "You're going to kill him." "No," she said sharply. "Vincent is going to kill him. I'm going to watch. I want to see it in his eyes, the moment he realizes I'm not the helpless little girl he once tormented, that there's someone willing to become a monster himself to protect me." The wind shifted, carrying with it the tang of rain and something else, sweet and cloying like flowers rotting in a closed room. Cordelia's grip on the device tightened. "He's close," she whispered. "I can smell him, his cologne. Too much always. Even as a boy, he thought it made him sophisticated." Holly's looked across the property with new eyes. The mansion loomed like a slumbering predator, its windows blank and watchful. Spanish moss hung eerily from the oaks, swaying though the air was still. Shadows between the trees seemed alive, moving with intent. "Mrs. Fairfield, you need to call the police," Holly said, voice cracking. "Tell them what? That my legally dead brother is hunting us, that we've built a torture chamber to bait him." Cordelia laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "No, Mr. Crane, this ends tonight, the way it should have ended 30 years ago." As if summoned by her words, headlights cut through the dim morning. Dr. Fairfield's car rolled into the driveway, but wrong. Too slow, wobbling as if the driver were half asleep or worse. The vehicle came to a stop 20 feet away. The door swung open, and Dr. Fairfield stumbled out, blood streaking behind his ear, his usual poise shattered. "Vincent," Cordelia cried, rushing to him. He raised a hand, shaking, holding her back. "Don't," he gasped. He's in the car." From the passenger seat, a figure emerged. Fluid, deliberate, terrifying in its calmness. Beauregard Rousseau. He was smaller than Holly's had imagined, slender, maybe 5'8", his expensive suit impeccable as if tailor-made yesterday. His face, ordinary in structure, held a quiet menace that made the air itself tense. eyes pale and cold, scanning, calculating, every step measured, every movement an echo of the horrors he had perfected over decades. The predator was here, and for the first time Hollis understood. Tonight the game had begun. Beauregard's eyes were empty wells of menace, cold and calculating like a serpent coiled in the sun. "Hello, sister," he said. His voice smooth and cultured, yet threaded with something primal that made Hollis's blood run ice cold. "You look thriving. Marriage suits you." Cordelia froze, fingers tightening around the tiny electronic device like a lifeline. "I know exactly what you've built here," Beauregard continued, stepping toward the shed with a predator's delight. "Ingenious, thorough. Your husband always was sharper than most, and you've exceeded expectations." He trailed his fingers along the cold concrete walls as if savoring a fine sculpture. "Soundproofing, climate control, anchor points for restraints. You've prepared everything I could possibly want." "This ends tonight," Dr. Fairfield said, forcing his shoulders back, blood dripping down his neck, the calm of a man who had faced monsters before. Beauregard smiled, a smile that seemed to twist reality itself, void of empathy or reason. "Oh, Vincent, you still don't understand, do you? This isn't about killing you. Death is too simple, too final. No, what I've designed will last months, maybe years. By the end, you'll beg me for release." His voice lowered as he turned to Cordelia, intimate and chilling, almost seductive. "Do you remember the games in the root cellar? I've invented so many more. 3 years to plan every move. And this shed, it will be perfect for our reunion." "You're insane," Holly said, stepping forward, hammer in hand. Beauregard's gaze shifted toward him, slow and deliberate, and Hollis felt exposed, a rabbit caught in a hawk's shadow. "Ah, the carpenter, Mr. Crane, how fortuitous. I wondered how I'd account for your disappearance, but no matter. You'll simply become a footnote, collateral in a family drama." A knife materialized in Beauregard's hand, sleek, surgical, lethal in its precision. He advanced toward Hollis with the confidence of a predator who had never known failure. 30 years of construction, bar fights, and scrapes had taught Hollis something about survival. He pivoted, hammer swinging in a blur, and struck Beauregard's wrist. The knife flew, spinning into the dirt. Beauregard's scream wasn't pain. It was rage, a pure, unbridled fury at his meticulously staged chaos being interrupted. "The shed," Dr. Fairfield barked. "Get him inside." What followed was a whirlwind of motion. Beauregard fought with animalistic cunning, teeth gritted, limbs striking, a storm of violence tempered by years of careful living. But Hollis and the Fairfields were prepared. Each movement of the shed, every hidden mechanism, every anchor point had been designed for this confrontation. Hollis dodged, parried, and struck again. Beauregard was fast, but he had underestimated the ingenuity and determination of those who had been waiting, planning for this exact night. It was brutal, it was raw, it was survival in its most intimate, terrifying form. And as the fight spilled into the shadows of the shed, one thing became clear. Tonight, the hunters had become the hunted. Hollis yanked Beauregard by the shoulders while Dr. Fairfield grabbed his legs, pulling him toward the steel door. Beauregard thrashed, sinking his teeth into Hollis's forearm, but decades of muscle and grit held fast. With a final heave, they dragged him across the concrete threshold. His polished shoes scraped against the floor, a harsh metallic sound that echoed like a warning. Inside, the chaos continued. Beauregard raked his nails across Dr. Fairfield's cheek, leaving angry red streaks, but Hollis slammed him to the ground and pinned him. The anchor points Hollis had fretted over during construction, those heavy-duty, industrial-grade eyesores, now became instruments of survival. Chains clamped over Beauregard's wrists and ankles, locking with a metallic finality that seemed to reverberate through the air. Only then did they allow themselves a single ragged breath. Cordelia stood nearby, her face pale, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "Chain him to the anchor points," she said softly. Beauregard's rage curdled into something far more dangerous, a smirk of amusement. "You still don't get it," he hissed. laughter curling at the edges. This is exactly what I wanted. All of us together, trapped in my little playground with no one to hear what comes next. From a jacket pocket, he produced a small device, sleek and clinical looking like a medical inhaler. Before anyone could react, he pressed it to his mouth. A pale vapor hissed into the room, thick and acrid, his own hallucinogenic concoction. He laughed, a sound like broken glass. "In 30 seconds," he whispered, voice trembling with manic glee, "none of you will know reality from nightmare. I know every fear you carry, and I will use it." Shadows danced along the walls, twisting unnaturally. Concrete seemed to ripple beneath their feet. Cordelia's face flickered, her features distorting into something monstrous, rows of teeth gnashing in the haze. Holly's gripped his hammer, but it felt impossibly heavy, crawling with insects that weren't really there. Through the rising terror, Cordelia's voice cut clear and steady. "Vincent," she called. Dr. Fairfield's hands moved with calm precision, reaching for a mounted valve along the wall. Not the emergency release Cordelia had shown Holly's, but something else. Hidden, unplanned, a secret safeguard. Beauregard's laughter faltered. What is that?" "Nitrogen," Dr. Fairfield said quietly, voice like steel wrapped in mercy. "Odorless, colorless, completely painless. You simply sleep and never wake. More mercy than you've earned." Beauregard's eyes widened, comprehension dawning with horror. "You can't, I'm chained. This is murder." "No," Cordelia whispered, kneeling beside her brother's restrained form. "This is justice, 30 years overdue." The gas hissed through hidden vents, a silent predator. Beauregard struggled, weaker with each gasp, yet his eyes never left Cordelia's. And in that gaze, Holly's glimpsed something shocking: respect. "Well played," Beauregard muttered, voice raw and begrudging. "Almost proud of you." Then he was gone. Silence swallowed the shed, leaving only the faint hiss of escaping gas and Cordelia's quiet, shuddering sobs. Later, they carried Beauregard's body to the darkest corner of the property, shrouded in plastic like a grotesque package. Holly's felt the shocking weight of a human life in his arms and inhaled the strange, cloying sweetness of death, a scent that no cologne or antiseptic could disguise. As they shoveled earth over the grave and scattered leaves to mask the disturbance, Holly sank onto his porch, bourbon in hand, trying in vain to erase the memory of Beauregard's eyes. The emptiness, the fury, the brief flicker of something like grudging respect, burning into his mind. The act of burial was more harrowing than witnessing the gas take him. The corpse seemed smaller in death, unnervingly childlike, and Hollies could not stop himself from imagining what kind of fractured child grows into a man capable of such horror. The weight of Beauregard's head against his shoulder as they lowered him into the grave, the cold resistance of lifeless limbs, the metallic tang in the air, all of it would follow Hollies into nightmares for years to come. Dr. Fairfield rewarded him generously, a sum large enough to retire in comfort. But the money could not cleanse Hollies of what he had seen, of what he had carried. Officially, Beauregard Rousseau never returned from the dead. Officially, he existed only in the fractured minds of his victims. But Hollies knew better. He had helped build a snare for a monster, and the monster had walked into it with the same arrogance and inevitability he had displayed in life. Whether the Fairfields were heroes or simply predators refined beyond their prey was a question Hollies would wrestle with privately, long after the world had moved on. He never touched another project requiring sound. Some knowledge, he realized, was too heavy for an honest man to bear.